Good afternoon. The Rules Committee will come to order, and welcome back from our August work period. It's exciting to see each of us together as we gather back. Virginia Fox was delighted. She even smiled at me, Louise, and that's used to be a certain thing, and now it's a rare day, and there's a Virginia 2 smile, so we're doing something right. I hope that everybody...
Check with each other.
Yeah. Hope everybody had a chance to be with their families and their constituents, and also get back to enjoying that 95 degrees in Rochester, New York. One of the issues that I heard a lot about during the break back in Dallas was the issue that today is before the Rules Committee, and that is H.J. Res. 64, which would disapprove of this administration's deal with the Iranian regime on nuclear weapons. The American people, I believe, are looking for Congress to explain what we're going to do and the actions that would take place. There are a lot of questions that not only surround this, but there are a lot of questions about our future. I think H.J. 64 provides our best opportunity to do exactly that, to dissect it, to look at it, and certainly today we're going to have a number of witnesses who will be able to provide expert testimony to that end. For the last few years, the administration has been dead set on cutting a deal with the Iranians regarding its nuclear program. I don't think that's any secret. In the last few months, however, it's become clear that the administration was interested in cutting, I think, any good deal with the Iranians. Because the administration negotiated from a position of weakness, I think it's ended up with a deal that gives Iran everything it wanted and leaves the American people wondering what we got in return. It cut a deal that gives Iran permanent sanctions relief for temporary agreements that merely keeps Iran from building a nuclear bomb in the near term. It's now up to Congress to stop this deal so that the Iranian regime does not have access to the nearly $150 billion that it would then use to continue to fund terrorist organizations that destabilize the Middle East and the world, including the United States of America. This deal pardons Iran's previous actions. It encourages Iran to continue to undermine our allies, and it turns Iran from a nuclear pariah into a nuclear partner. This week, Congress will have an opportunity to completely review this deal with information that has been provided to us, and it's the foremost congressional expert on the deal is the gentleman who is with us today, Congressman Ed Royce. Chairman Royce has led over 30 hearings and briefings on this deal. I look forward to his insight, and I also know that we have two other important witnesses that represent the Democrat Party, Mr. Levin from the Ways and Means Committee, and certainly Ms. Waters, ranking member of the Financial Services Committee. I'm aware that this is a big deal. This committee is prepared to ask tough questions. This committee is prepared to ask serious and long-range questions about the future of not only this deal, but to understand more about what we're trying to accomplish here today. Before we defer to our first panel that will include not only Mr. Levin, but also Ms. Waters, and I would ask that they feel free to come join the table at any point that they would choose to. I would defer to my colleague, my dear friend, the gentlewoman from Rochester, New York, for any opening statements she would choose to make. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that time. I want to welcome the witnesses as well. Look forward to hearing what they have to say. I do need to correct one thing. I believe that you mentioned that this was an agreement between the President of the United States and Iran. This is an agreement between the Security Council of the United Nations and Iran that was negotiated by 5 countries plus 1, as we all know. A Security Council has already voted 15-0 on this plan, and I'm assuming that that is the controlling vote. But in any case, we know that if everything holds as it said it was going to hold in the Senate, that this is dead on arrival. But we will go on with the game. We're used to that. We've spent, 57 votes on trying to kill health care. But anyway, thank you for yielding me the time. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran has been hailed as, quote, remarkable, end quote, by retired Army General Colin Powell, that I think all of us admire. the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, obviously knowing everything you need to know about military operations, and also the former Secretary of State for President George W. Bush. It has the broad and firm support of the international community. Even the members of Israel's security community have come out in support of this unprecedented, comprehensive, and enforceable agreement. Even so, opponents decry it as weak, riddled with loopholes, and inadequate. And to those people, I ask, what is the alternative? The agreement has flaws, perhaps, but it is my firm belief that without it, we will be on an ever-quickening path toward a nuclear-armed Iran, which is unacceptable to all of us. This agreement is a step toward peace, toward diplomacy, toward unifying the international community. Our negotiating partners, Great Britain, China, Russia, Germany, and France, along with the rest of the world, are looking for Congress of the United States not to embarrass itself, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Thank you very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Ms. Slaughter, thank you very much. I want to welcome not only Mrs. Waters, but Mr. Levin, and young chairman of the committee, Mr. Royce, for taking time to be with us today. Obviously, without objection, anything you have in writing will be into the record. You know that you are here to provide expert testimony. You recognize that, and I do too, that this is a very serious issue, and I appreciate each one of you being here today. Mr. Chairman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions, and thank you very much, Mr. Slaughter.
Is that microphone on, Mr. Chairman?
Would just start, Mr. Chairman, with the observation that the premise there, that the controlling vote would be the Security Council vote, which Ms. Slaughter raised, sort of goes against the very intention of the House and Senate in passing legislation in the first place that would give Congress a vote on this. And this really raised the question, the timing of going to the Security Council before we received the briefing on the agreement itself, and before the people's representatives in the House and Senate even had an opportunity to be recorded on this. The fact that the assertion would be made that the controlling vote would be the Security Council of the United Nations rather than Congress, after Congress had passed legislation and after that legislation was signed by the President of the United States to have our input. And part of that was for us to have the responsibility to look into this agreement before we made an informed decision upon whether or not it was in the interest of the United States. Now, we've held some 30 hearings in the Foreign Affairs Committee and briefings, and I just want to share with the members here, with the chairman and ranking member, that we very much appreciate the Committee on Rules meeting to consider this House Joint Resolution 64. What this resolution would do, it's a resolution of disapproval that I introduced that would prevent a flawed nuclear agreement with Iran from being implemented. And as you know, this legislation is possible because of the vote we made here in the House and in the Senate on the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act that overwhelmingly passed. The vote was 400 to 25. It was, again, signed into law by the President. And that legislation established a process for Congress to review the final nuclear agreement with Iran and then take an up or down vote on the merits. And review we have. Many of you have had the opportunity to see some of the coverage of the committee hearings, but we've conducted that review in a bipartisan way. Ranking Member Engel has been a tireless partner in this. The bipartisan way in which the committee has approached this issue wouldn't surprise Mr. Collins or Judge Hastings. We've kept to our collaborative roots since those members left the committee. And while we strive to present a united front to the world, we can't always agree. Mr. Chairman, I don't relish bringing this resolution to the floor. We all wanted these negotiations to succeed, but I'm afraid that this agreement not only comes up short, it is fatally flawed. And indeed, it is dangerous. A few key concerns we've heard from the experts in front of our committee. First, Iran is not required to dismantle key bomb-making technology. Second, Iran is permitted a vast enrichment capacity, reversing decades of bipartisan nonproliferation policy that never imagined endorsing this type of nuclear infrastructure for any country, never mind a country like Iran. And Iran is allowed to continue its research and development to gain an industrial-scale nuclear program once this agreement begins to expire in as little as 10 years. 10 years is a flash in time. And then the Iranian obligations start to unwind. I just don't see that as a formula for a safer, more secure region. While members of Congress insisted on anywhere, anytime inspections, Iran has agreed to something that they call managed access. So instead of allowing international inspectors into suspicious sites within 24 hours, it will take 24 days, but not on the military basis, because worse yet, there have been revelations in recent days about a side agreement between Iran and the United Nations nuclear watchdog. This agreement sets the conditions in which a key Iranian military site suspected of nuclear bomb work will be explored. When I say suspected of nuclear bomb work, the director of the IAEA tells me there's 1,000 pages of documents they have on the bomb work that was done there. And while the details have been kept from Congress directly, it's reported that instead of international inspectors doing the international inspecting, we're going to have Iranians themselves take the inspection lead. Iran has cheated on every agreement they have signed to date. Why are we trusting them to self-police? And the deal guts the sanctions web that is putting intense pressure on Iran. Virtually all economic, financial, and energy sanctions disappear. Billions will be made available to Iran to pursue its terrorism. And when I say Iran, remember the way it's set up there, with the IRGC controlling so many of the companies. This is not like a normal business arrangement in a company. When these companies were nationalized basically by the government, they were turned over to the IRGC. So it is those particular elements that are going to be strengthened in this deal. If we have $100 billion that comes out of escrow and goes into those accounts, this isn't a situation where you've got a free-functioning economy where maybe laborers push for higher wages. No, the IRGC will control that money, and they will decide what they spend it on. And we've already seen a little bit of their pronouncements about what's important to them. Getting to Hezbollah, the types of systems, GPS systems, that will allow Hezbollah to fire some 80,000 plus rockets and missiles that the IRGC have supplied Hezbollah. Getting to Hamas, the weapons to replace those that have already been fired. Rebuilding the tunnels that Elliot Engel and I have been in. That's another commitment, apparently, that the IRGC is making. So when we put that down payment into their hands, that's where the down payment goes. And as Iran will be reconnected to the global economy, this is going to jumpstart those businesses that the IRGC runs over there. So to our dismay, in addition, Iran won a late concession to remove international restrictions on its ballistic missile program and on conventional arms, imperiling the security of the region. And frankly, when we talk about the removal on ballistic missile programs, we have to remember the words of the Ayatollah. It's the responsibility of every military man to figure out in Iran how to help mass produce ICBMs. I don't think he's talking about a space program with that comment. So, Mr. Chairman, and the reason I don't think it is because he follows it up with death to America. That's why I think that his line of thought is one which is a national security threat to the United States. So, Chairman, those are just a few of the reasons that I'm opposed to this agreement. I appreciate the fact that this committee and the leadership from both parties recognize the gravity of the vote we will have this week, and I'd ask that the rule make as much time as possible for debate so that as many members as possible can have their voices heard on this historic agreement, and that this be considered under a closed rule so that we can have the straight up or down vote as envisioned by the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act passed last spring. Whatever your view on this agreement, I think we can all agree that we face a very difficult and gravely threatening challenge from the Iranian regime. This is a regime, again, that chants on a weekly basis, death to America, death to Israel, and frankly, they mean it. The region is a mess, and Congress has a role to play. And I feel, working with my colleagues and friend, Elliot Engel, that we've done a good job vetting this agreement, and now members can come to their own conclusions as to whether this improves our national security. I feel it doesn't, but the House will come to its collective decision as it should. And I appreciate your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I note that both of our witnesses that appear, first from Financial Services and Ways and Means, I believe are in support of the administration side. Would that be correct? Then I will make you make a determination. I will allow you the opportunity to decide which of you would present first, knowing that you both had, then the gentleman, Mr. Levin, would present on behalf of the Ways and Means. The gentleman's recognized.
Both of us will be recognized, right?
I'm talking about you being recognized first, and then we'll recognize Ms. Waters.
Okay, thank you
very much, gentlemen.
Thank you. No, thank you. Once again, it's a pleasure to be here, and hello to everybody. After a few, more than a few weeks away, I had a chance before we left, it seems so long ago, to speak out on this and to express my position. Since then, like all of you, we've gone home, we've talked vastly and intensely and intensively with our constituents and others. I think that's been a productive process. As I understand it, you're going to allow many, many hours of debate, which I think is a very wise choice. So let me not go into a lot of detail. There'll be many hours of debate, and I'll participate in them. I thought instead I'd refer to the statements of two people. My hope is that my reference to them and your reference to them might spark some kind of bipartisanship in this institution on this issue. I'd first like to refer, as mentioned by Louise Slaughter, the statements, it was the testimony on Sunday of Colin Powell. He's the former Secretary of State. We know his illustrious career. And here's what he said, and I quote, "I think this is a good deal. I've studied very carefully the outline of the deal and what's in that deal. And I've also carefully looked at the opposition to the deal, and my judgment after balancing these two sets of information is that it's a pretty good deal. Now, I know there are objections to it, but here's why I think it's a good deal. One of the great concerns that the opposition has, that we're leaving open a lane for the Iranians to go back to creating a nuclear weapon in 10 or 15 years. They're forgetting the reality that they've been on a superhighway for the last 10 years to create a nuclear weapon or a nuclear weapons program with no speed limit." And then he refers to the reduction in the centrifuges and in the stockpile, a very dramatic reduction in it. And then he goes on to say, and again I quote, "And so we have stopped this highway race that they were going down, and I think that's very important. Now, will they comply with it? Will they actually do all of this? Will they get nothing until they show compliance? And that's the important part of this. As he said, they'll get nothing until they show compliance." Well, the other criticism of this deal, and I continue quoting Colin Powell, has to do with behavior changes. Why didn't we ask for? It wasn't enough to just try to slow them down on their nuclear front or stop their ability to get a nuclear weapon. It is, should we also put in this deal, having them stop the funding of Hamas, stopping the funding of Hezbollah, stopping the backing of Assad in Syria. And I interject here, I think we all deeply feel the importance of that. And here's how he continued. I think all of these are important objectives, and they should not be set aside because of this deal. We have to keep pushing on the bad behavior that the Iranians show constantly throughout the world. But this deal specifically had to do with the thing that was most concerning to the world, most dangerous to the world, and that was their nuclear program, which could produce a weapon in a very short period of time. That has been thrown into a detour. And then he continues, and I'm reminded of what my former boss, Ronald Reagan, used to say when he talked to the Soviets, trust but verify. With respect to the Iranians, it's don't trust, never trust, and always verify. And I think a very vigorous verification program has been put in place with the IAEA and other international organizations. And then he continued, and so even if we were going to kill this deal, which is not going to happen, it's going to take effect anyway, because all of these other countries that were in it with us are going to move forward. The UN is going to move forward. And 100 nations have already agreed to this deal, thinking it's a good deal. And they're all going to move forward. We're going to be standing in the sidelines. And so he finished, at least I finished quoting this. Now people will say, no, can't trust them. I don't trust them. I say we have a deal, let's see how they implement the deal. They don't implement it. Bail out. None of our options are going. None of our options are going. But this is something we ought to pursue and try to make it happen under the terms under which the deal was reached. Secondly, I'd like to quote from Brent Scowcroft. I had a chance now 6 weeks ago to talk to him about this. He was, as we know, the National Security Advisor to Presidents Gerald Ford and George H.W. Bush. And I quote briefly from his op-ed. Participation in the nuclear deal. If we walk away, we walk away alone. The world's leading powers work together effectively because of U.S. leadership. To turn our back on this accomplishment would be an abdication of the United States' unique role and responsibility, incurring justified dismay among our allies and friends. We would lose all leverage over Iran's nuclear activities. So let me just close. You know, I went back and looked at the statements of Senator Vandenberg, who came from Michigan, who talked about the importance of bipartisanship at the water's edge. I think he maybe was the first to say that. I think we all need to, as we proceed in this debate, to keep that very much in mind. The feelings are deep. Mine are very deep, going back from when I was perhaps an infant. It was a matter of deep concern in our family regarding the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in Israel. We've all looked at this in a very, very diligent way. And Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, I hope you will allow long debate. I hope the debate may keep in mind what I said at the beginning. It is important, I think, to see if we can somehow, and maybe we'll have to do it afterwards, reestablish the bipartisanship on these key issues, which has been a hallmark of this institution for a long time. Thank you very much.
Mr. Levin, thank you very much. We'll now move to the financial services angle, and we would recognize the gentlewoman from Los Angeles.
Thank you,
Ranking Member, now
thank you, Mr.
recognized.
Chairman. Ranking Member Slaughter, and other members of the committee, I want to thank you for allowing me to testify before you on HJ 64, a resolution disapproving the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Mr. Chairman and members, when I had a discussion with my staff about the Rules Committee meeting today, they basically said, well, you know, it's not necessary to go. And they said that even talk with some of the staff people of the Rules Committee who said, well, you know, this is perfunctory. I mean, it's not really necessary. It's going to be a closed rule. There are no amendments. But I rushed from the airplane coming in from Los Angeles today to be at this Rules Committee, despite the fact that I guess it is known that will be a closed rule, because I want to be recorded in history that I took every opportunity to make my voice heard on this defining issue. This is a defining issue for the world, not just for the United States of America. I want it to be known that I believe that the 5+1 who came together on this joint agreement is extraordinary. To have China and Russia at the table talking about averting a nuclear war is extremely important. And not only do I want to be recorded in history at every opportunity, I want to share with you and all of my colleagues not only how I feel, but what I have learned as this debate has taken place around this country and in my district. And so I'm here today to testify before you on HJ 64, this resolution disapproving the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal reached between Iran and 6 world powers that has the support of numerous foreign policy experts, military personnel, atomic energy experts, and the unanimous support of the National Security Council, which voted 15-0 in favor of the deal. I very much believe this deal is in the best interest of the United States and international security because it stands up very well as a barrier to proliferation for at least 15 years, and it establishes an intrusive inspections regime to ensure that Iran's program remains heavily monitored and exclusively peaceful. I also believe that it was the best agreement that could have been reached. The argument from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the House Republican leadership supporting this resolution that a better deal is possible ignores their own views of the Iranian regime. These critics describe the Iranian regime as a wholly intransigent one, bent on regional domination and unwilling to show any accommodation. Given this depiction, what basis do they have for saying that somehow Iran could have been persuaded to concede even more than they did? The other alternative, which I believe many of the agreement's critics prefer, is an attack on Iran led by our country. The first thing that must be said about this is that every expert agrees that short of an American occupation of Iran, nothing could prevent an Iranian nuclear capacity. The war in Iraq that President Bush initiated was the single biggest disaster any American president ever caused. War with Iran would be far worse. Mr. Chairman and members, I chaired a committee of the House opposing the war in Iraq. And as we look back and reflect on the loss of life, over 1,000 American soldiers, and the cost of that war, I think we can all agree it was a mistake. If we fail to understand the significance and the importance of this agreement, and we in any way attempt to walk away and isolate ourselves. It would be perhaps the biggest mistake this country has ever made. Without this deal, we would very quickly face the unpalatable choice between allowing Iranians to continue its march towards a nuclear capability or using military force to temporarily stop it. Let's be clear about one thing. If Congress rejects this deal, it will not lead to a better one. If the United States walks away, we walk away alone. The harsh international sanctions against Iran that have been in place for over a decade were able to get Iran to the negotiating table. But economic sanctions alone have not prevented Iran from continuing to pursue a nuclear capability. In fact, history suggests that continued economic pressure will not force Iran to agree to everything we might want. Despite harsh sanctions and isolation, North Korea still became a nuclear weapon state. Crippling sanctions on Iraq still did not lead to Saddam relenting to U.S. demands, even under the threat of invasion. There is no guarantee that even powerful sanctions and the threat of force will lead Iran to eliminate all aspects of its nuclear program, and plenty of reason to think that perhaps it will not. Instead, the United States will have broken from its European allies. The necessary international support for Iran-related sanctions will likely erode. Iran would be able to rapidly expand its capacity to produce bomb-grade materials, and we would lose out on securing enhanced inspections needed to detect a clandestine weapons effort. In other words, the risk of a nuclear-armed Iran would significantly increase. This deal deserves support because it is a well-built agreement that has Iran conceding that they will not pursue nuclear weapons. It is significantly constrains Iranian nuclear efforts for more than 15 years, and it gives nuclear inspectors unprecedented access. Iran must prove that its nuclear program is peaceful. If it fails to do so, with this deal, the United States will have all of the tools it does now have in the future. And so, if I can just wrap this up by again reiterating to all of you that we all have an opportunity to be recorded in history the way I think we would like to be recorded, that we joined hands in an effort to bring about peace. I am more than optimistic that we can do this. I'm more than optimistic that we can begin to rely on the young people in Iran, many of whom have demonstrated that they too want peace, and that the Ayatollah and others who have sent a different kind of message around the world consistently will not be in control forever. And it's up to us to have a vision for this possibility. And I want to be recorded that way. And I thank you for allowing me to be here at the Rules Committee today to be able to say one more time that I support this agreement.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, you began talking about, and it's been a discussion today, about the process that we know that the President did prefer to walk around Congress, not thinking he needed the Congress involved. I am of a belief that something this big should involve congressional input and dialogue, and that's really what the Corker bill was about. And you know, can you tell us real quickly, how did the Corker bill ensure that Congress has the opportunity to block this deal, and why we're here is relevant to, I believe, your committee and the 4 other committees of jurisdiction, and why we're here today at the Rules Committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just make the observation that Congress registered its concerns very early in this process, and in a bipartisan way, because if we think back to the legislation that I and Elliot Engel originally authored and tried to push in terms of this negotiation, that legislation, which passed this House 400 to 20, and then was blocked over in the Senate at the request of the administration and could not come up, that would have given the Ayatollah a choice between economic collapse or real compromise on his nuclear program. And I want to get to this point, that the President offers a false choice between this agreement or war. Even a supporter of the deal testified in front of the committee that I chair that I wouldn't say that if you were opposed to this deal that somehow that leads to war. I think that's false, said the witness on behalf of the administration. It is false. It is false. Indeed, the country's top military office, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, recently testified in front of Congress disputing the assertion that it was this deal or war, noting that the United States would have a range of options. What are those options? The most important one, the most important option that we had, the most effective sanctions against Iran, have always been those that give companies and countries a choice to do business with Iran or the United States. And that indeed is the premise of the legislation that we had passed 400-20. That is what we wanted to put into play. When given such a choice, which would still be possible to do if Congress rejects this agreement, then the result, in every case we've seen in the past, is companies and countries choose the United States. They do not choose to do business and lock themselves out of our market. The Obama administration has never liked sanctions. They fought vigorously to oppose sanctions targeting Iran's central bank in December 2011. Then, as they are now, the Obama administration claimed that imposing these sanctions would divide the international coalition and leave the United States alone in the world. I'll remind you, that didn't happen when we hung tough in 2011, when Congress pushed for those sanctions, and we got that set of sanctions through. Indeed, that's why Iran's even at the table. So, businesses, and in particular banks, will be hesitant to put a premium on the Iranian market if that means getting shut out of the United States. I think all of us understand that. That's the power of the United States financial markets. That's the potential damage of reputational risk to any company that makes that decision. That's the power that we in Congress wanted to deploy in this negotiation, and that is what the administration did not deploy flat out by blocking the legislation that I and Elliot Engel had passed out of this House. So while maintaining a united sanctions front after Congress rejects the nuclear agreement will be difficult, it will be easier to do so today than 5 years from now when Iran is caught cheating and a sanctions regime must be reconstructed, because I guarantee you, based on Iran's past behavior, they will be caught cheating. So I would ask you, would you sooner deploy such a strategy now in order to force them to actually open up with a program where you can have verifiable inspections? Going back to Reagan's quote, which was actually an old Russian saying, right? Trust but verify. The verification is the part where we both agree with it. We don't trust Iran. It's the verification program that's missing here. And that is what gives us one of the many issues that gives us such great qualms in moving forward with something that would allow the Iranians to do their own verification and bring that to the United Nations. For all of those reasons, that's why we felt Congress should be involved in negotiating this agreement, and why we are very disappointed that of the letter we sent on the committee, 84% of the members of this House signed that letter for those 4 issues that we wanted in this agreement. And not one of those issues is in the agreement. Anywhere, anytime inspections, not there. Don't lift the sanctions up front. Hold them for the duration of the agreement to make sure that we have compliance, not there. The answers to the 12 questions from the IAEA, for which we have 1,000 pages of evidence, not there. The request that this be multiple decades instead of 10-plus years, not there. And then something we never even envisioned. They added lifting the arms embargo on Iran itself, so Iran will have the ability to move forward with its ICBM program, as well as transferring conventional arms to Hezbollah and Hamas. I've never seen anything negotiated as poorly as this agreement, and that's why we're here today, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, could I just comment briefly?
Yes, sir.
I have a meeting at 6. I just need to could I just take a couple minutes?
The gentleman would like a couple more minutes? Would this be an opening statement, or would this be to reply to a question?
I asked if I could comment on what the chairman
You'd like to
said.
reply to the same question. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. It's sometimes said that the administration fought the sanctions throughout. That's not true. I was involved in many of the discussions about sanctions. And if anybody wants to raise that question, I suggest that they talk to Howard Berman. It's not true. There were differences of opinion about the nature of the sanctions in some respect. It is incorrect to say that this administration opposed sanctions against Iran. It's not true. And I just want to say one other word about this notion that we'll be stronger turning this down in terms of sanctions. I don't know of any responsible person who's looked at this, who has the background in it, who says that. I just suggest that you look at the testimony of Secretary Jack Lew. He just refutes this notion that if we turn this down, we can, on our own, effectively impose a stronger sanctions regime. That's fallacious. We would walk alone, as Mr. Scowcroft has said and Colin Bowell has said. The notion that we have the financial power when already other nations have begun to undertake some further economic work with Iran, it's an illusion. It's an illusion because so many of the sanctions would disappear. The other countries would not participate. And the ministers from the other countries have said very clearly to us that this notion that you can turn this down and have a stronger set of sanctions is something that is imaginary. I appreciate the chance to answer your question. We'll have a full debate on this for hours, as many as you allow. We'll have a full debate about this. Mr. Royce will have a chance to raise these points, and we'll be fully prepared to answer them.
But if the gentleman would yield, part of this is personal for me because one of those bills was my bill. And when you say the president did not oppose sanctions, it was my, if you would yield, it was my legislation. It did pass 400 to 20. It passed unanimously through the committee. And yes, the president and the Secretary of State opposed it every step of the way and managed to block it in the Senate. So for me, my personal experience is one of not being able to convince the administration that putting additional pressure on Iran with sanctions would be helpful. And the conclusion I reached is one that was shared by the vast majority of this House at the time.
If you look, if I take back my time.
Excuse just a minute. I appreciate the gentleman having a discussion back and forth. We're going
We'll
to continue. Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you very much. I want to be respectful of all three of you to get the things out that you wanted to respond to a question. My last point that I'd like to make is simply this. The question about that this will lead to war. And I think I have a tendency to understand that the American foreign policy, I believe since the dropping of the bomb has been the belief that fewer countries should have access to nuclear weapons. And have spent a great deal of time trying to watch that, the proliferation that might occur, whether it was the breaking up of the Soviet Union or other nations as they go through their ups and downs, and that it defies my logic that we would just automatically say, but you can have it in 15 years. when we've tried to do everything we can do to not do that. And it seems like to me that when negotiation fails, that's when you get war. I believe that to have any country that threatens our allies or Americans, that it is in our best interest, Mr. Chairman, to make sure that we are doing what we can to protect this country. And I believe it's a capitulation and giving in to that. And so I have answered the question myself. I believe this is about making Iran the strongest person in the Middle East. And that comes against conventional wisdom. I don't understand that, and I'm worried about that.
Chairman, if I could respond to that, again, to quote the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, as he said, it does not mean that we would have a military conflict. He said the United States has a range of options. He did not think it meant that. He thinks that it doesn't mean war. But what it does mean is rolling up our sleeves and turning up the economic pressure on the regime and on the regime's supporters and negotiating a better agreement that advances the national security interests of the United States and our allies and our partners. But that is something we will debate as we go forward. And
Well, my point was the negotiations, we gave it to them. If we didn't want them to have it, it would resort to war. Thank you very much.
right. We're not opposed to diplomacy. We're just against bad diplomacy, and that's what we're going to debate.
Well,
whether this is
I think
good or
this
bad.
gives up diplomacy. The gentlewoman, yes, sir.
You to be excused.
Yeah, Mr. Levin, you did tell me ahead of time that you had things that you had to do, and I want to thank the gentleman for
And
being
I
here.
appreciate the time
You did well enough
and I
to be
think-
invited
I
back,
think
and I
we'll see each
appreciate you
other
very much. Thank you very much.
on the floor. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Ms. Waters, will you be staying? The gentlewoman is invited to stay. The gentlewoman from North Carolina, Vice Chairman of the Committee, Mrs. Fox, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the Chairman of the committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, for being here with us, and thank Ms. Waters for being here also. Mr. Chairman, most of us here today agree the United States cannot tolerate a nuclear regime in Iran. Unfortunately, President Obama and his allies have spent the past 2 months vilifying as warmongers those who are deeply concerned, as I am, that this deal may postpone but will not prevent Iran from gaining nuclear weapons. That is unfortunate rhetoric from those who themselves stated, if you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care. Before the final deal was announced, I spoke on the House floor about my concerns that inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency would have limited access to key sites under untenable bureaucratic terms. Given what we know about the text of the deal itself, from the text of the deal itself, what we've learned about the agreement between Iran and the IAEA, these concerns are well-founded. In addition to allowing Iran to continue and enhance its nuclear capabilities, this deal lifts crucial economic sanctions, allowing billions of dollars to flow into the Iranian economy. It is expected that much of this windfall, estimated to exceed $100 billion, will pass through Iran's economy to entities like Hezbollah, which has dedicated itself to war with Israel since the early 1980s. Mr. Royce, your discussion with the chairman makes it clear a wealthier, more militarized Iran poses a significant threat to the stability of our allies in the region, especially to our friend Israel. Given the Ayatollah's continued public incitement of violence against Israel, what steps can Congress take in tandem with disapproval of the joint agreement to bolster Israel's security and stability in the Middle East?
Well, Representative Fox, let me share with you my concerns in terms of what I saw up close on the basis of Iran's
I think
transfer.
your microphone needs to be.
On the basis of Iran's transfer of military capability to Hezbollah. In 2006, when I was chairman of the terrorist subcommittee, anti-terrorism subcommittee, we were in Haifa when it was being shelled by the Hezbollah regime. And at that point, Quds forces were on the ground. Iranian forces were assisting. They maybe had 10,000 rockets and missiles in the inventory. In Haifa, they were slamming these missiles. Each one had 90,000 ball bearings into the center of town. There were 600 victims in the trauma hospital. So when we talk about how are we going to prevent Iran from building on the tragedy that we've already witnessed, the first question is this. We've already shown an incapacity to stop Iran from transferring what was 10,000 rockets and now is 80,000. But this is the recent statement that the Iranian government has made. They now say what we need to do is to transfer, and this would be a violation, right, of the old arms embargo, but it's one of the reasons they wanted that lifted. They want to transfer to Hezbollah the GPS capability or the ability to direct these missiles so that they can be fired precisely at a given target. No longer will they just slam into the center of town. Now they can hit the airport, or they can hit a skyscraper in Tel Aviv, or they can hit Jerusalem at a specific location. That's the capability the Iranian regime is trying to transfer. It's hard to do it when you don't have the resources, but boy, if you lift $100 billion worth of money that's held in escrow, and that goes into the hands of the IRGC, then they're going to have that capability. They've also, it was reported in the Wall Street Journal, Iran is looking to rebuild the tunnels. Now, myself and Elliot Engel were in one of those tunnels. There were 33 of them that have been discovered. They need to be rebuilt, apparently, in the eyes of the IRGC in Iran. And so that government is offering to rebuild those tunnels for Hamas, resupply Hamas with weapons. And the question I have is, in the middle of this negotiation, you have the head of the Quds forces who personally led a raid into Israel, who helped overthrow the government in Yemen, one of our allies, who has led forces in Syria and in Iraq, who has killed 500 Americans. This individual reportedly made a trip over to Russia in order to talk with Russian officials. I wonder what he wanted. One of the things we know he wants is greater capability in offensive weaponry, missiles and otherwise, and now the Russians are talking about sending to Iran new missiles. Those are the types of weapons that Iran would like to put in the hands of Hezbollah. And now that they're in Syria, by the way, they're on the border, and recently Iran has been charged with firing missiles from Syria into Israel. So what I see here is a need to really focus on the fact that this tranche of cash into the hands of these military leaders in Iran and these Quds forces on the ground that help Hezbollah is going to give them the opportunity to open up in very short order a new front. So if this goes through and the sanctions are lifted and the arms embargo is lifted, these are the worries I think we have. But by the way, it's not just Israel. I'll just remind you, our friends in the region, it wasn't just Yemen that fell. Jordan has concerns. The Gulf states have concerns. Egypt has to live with all the money that Iran puts into the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood. So think about where this money is going to go and how many of our friends and allies are going to be threatened as a result.
Mr. Chairman, I know we are spending a lot of time here today, and I will ask one more quick question, if I might. The administration has assured us that some U.S. sanctions will remain in place, like those related to Iran's deplorable human rights violations. In your view, Mr. Royce, how effective will these remaining sanctions be in altering Iran's behavior?
Well, think about this, if you will, members of the Rules Committee. Iran takes the lives of about 2,500 of its citizens every year. You hear about the cases in Evin prison of the torture and the killings. Those are the individuals who have views, religious views, that differ from the regime. Think about the 4 Americans that have been held by Iran and the fact that they're not released. So we had one measure of leverage besides the drop in the price of oil, and that was the sanctions that we were holding on Iran. That gave us, if we were to double down on the sanctions and make it harder on Iran, that gave us our best hope of changing the behavior of that regime. Who now will be empowered when we lift the sanctions? As I said before, who controls in Iran the bank accounts? Theirs is not a free economy. The Ayatollahs, the clerics, and the commanders of the IRGC, of their military, are the ones that control the major companies because after the '79 revolution, they were transferred to those individuals. So as the money courses in, as the money goes through the society, they are the ones with the leverage. Up until now, Iran has been on the ropes. Now, lift the sanctions, and those individuals will be empowered. And unfortunately, they're true believers in terms of their cause. When they say death to America, when they say death to Israel, and you saw Rouhani himself marching in the street, well, this is a story that the New York Times carried. They said the crowd behind him were saying death to America. The signs in front of him, death to Israel. They quote Rouhani, and they ask him, how does the future look? He says, with this deal, the future looks very bright. Wouldn't it have been better if we at least had got them to change their rhetoric in terms of their threats? Talk about telegraphing a punch. I mean, the Iranian regime has been very clear in terms of its objectives since 1979, and the neighboring countries can attest to the fact that they're not only destabilizing the region, they have very real designs on what they would like to do in those neighborhoods in terms of sowing terror, and they've proved that they can do it whenever they can get their hands on hard currency. They're going to have a lot more hard currency, unfortunately, if this deal goes through.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Slaughter, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the Statement of Administrative Policy.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I'd like to read from it and just let the administration speak for itself here this afternoon. The administration strongly opposes, as we all know, and it just talks about who is in the P5+1. It would effectively block the international community from peacefully and verifiably preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, would allow for the resumption of the unconstrained and unchecked Iranian nuclear program, and would lead to the unraveling of the international sanctions regime that was sustained because the administration sought to diplomatically resolve concerns regarding Iran's nuclear program. Further enactment of this resolution would deal a devastating blow to America's credibility as a leader of diplomacy and could ultimately result in the exhaustion of alternatives to military action. If this resolution were enacted, the hard work of sustaining a unified coalition to combat Iran's destabilizing activities in the region would be much more difficult, as would America's ability to lead the world on nuclear nonproliferation. Preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon has been a top priority of the United States and the administration. It's been a longstanding policy to retain all options to achieve that objective, including possible military options. At the same time, the administration has worked diligently with Congress and our international partners to achieve a peaceful, diplomatic solution, recognizing that a negotiated understanding offers a more effective, a verifiable, and durable resolution. The JCPOA achieves this by reinforcing the prohibition against Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon, by verifiably cutting off all of Iran's potential pathways to a nuclear weapon, and instituting the most comprehensive inspection and verification regime ever negotiated to monitor a nuclear program. The JCPOA makes the United States and the world safer by removing the gravest threat that Iran could pose to the Middle East, including Israel and our Gulf partners. The JCPOA, if faithfully implemented, will verifiably cut off Iran's ability to pursue a nuclear weapon through uranium enrichment, through a plutonium pathway, or through a potential covert plan. Iran is bound under the Treaty of the Nonproliferation of Nuclear Weapons to never seek a nuclear weapon, and the JCPOA provides the tools to ensure that Iran cannot use a peaceful program as a cover to pursue a nuclear weapon. The JCPOA is not based on trust, but on an unprecedented inspections, monitoring, and transparency regime. Under the JCPOA, there will be 24/7 monitoring of Iran's key nuclear facilities. Inspectors will be able to get timely access to the places they need to go for inspections, or Iran will be in violation of the JCPOA and risk the reimposition of sanctions, which, let me add, would probably only be possible if we have this treaty, or this agreement, rather, because the other nations in this agreement would not go along with reinstating sanctions, and they have said so. For decades, the inspectors will have access to Iran's entire nuclear supply chain, from the uranium mines and mills to the centrifuge production facilities. And this means in order for Iran to covertly acquire a nuclear weapon, it would need to build an entirely separate, undetected nuclear supply chain. The JCPOA also facilitates the International Atomic Energy Agency's ability to complete its report on the possible military dimensions of Iran's pre-2003 program. It also ensures that Iran has powerful incentives to keep its nuclear commitments. Before getting phased relief from secondary nuclear-related sanctions, Iran has to complete all of the major nuclear steps, which will extend the amount of time it would take Iran to acquire enough fissile material for one weapon from the current 2 to 3 months to at least a year. For example, the core of Iran's heavy water reactor at Iraq will be pulled out and filled with concrete, rendering it unable to produce plutonium that could be used for a weapon. 2/3 of its nearly 20,000 currently installed centrifuges will be removed. Its current stockpile of enriched uranium will be reduced by 98%, and it must put in place the monitoring, surveillance, and access measures that will ensure the ability to verify that its nuclear program is used exclusively for peaceful purposes going forward. If Iran fails to abide by its JCPOA commitments, all relieved sanctions, both unilateral and multilateral, can snap back into place. The administration is fully committed to continuing to brief and closely consult the Congress as we work with our international partners to ensure successful implementation of the JCPOA. As we address our concerns with Iran's nuclear program, the administration remains clear-eyed and shares the deep concerns of the Congress and the American people about Iran's support for terrorism, its destabilizing role in the region, its human rights abuses, and that is why we will continue to vigorously enforce our sanctions against these activities and work closely with our partners in the region to counter them, using a range of unilateral and multilateral tools. The JCPOA must be assessed by what it achieves on its central goal of preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And the administration urges the Congress to fully consider the stakes for our national security of walking away from the international community. Without the JCPOA in place, Iran would likely resume the advancement of its nuclear program without any of the constraints or transparency required by this deal, and without the international unity of our sanctions regime, which would be the worst of all possible worlds, leaving us in a position of weakness, not strength. The President has made it clear that he will veto any legislation that prevents the successful implementation of JCPOA. If the President were presented with H.J. Res. 64, he would veto the resolution, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cole, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to begin by thanking both our distinguished members for being here. Particularly want to thank the chairman, who I think has been exceptionally articulate and astute in the discussion that we've had. And I also want to posit a couple of things up front before I ask my questions. First, I don't question anybody's motives in this debate. I really don't. Quite frankly, on the president's side, look, about 2 out of every 3 people of opinion in the country are against this deal. And most Americans think, according to the latest poll, I actually saw another one just today, that if a majority of Congress disapproves, as it likely will, that the president shouldn't veto that. And you know, from the president's standpoint, the future Democratic leader in the Senate is opposed to this deal. The former Democratic chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is opposed to this deal. I believe both the current ranking members of the Senate and the House Foreign Affairs Committee, both Democrats obviously, are opposed to this deal. So if you're willing to push ahead under that, then you certainly must believe in the deal. So I don't have any doubt the president believes in what he's doing. I don't have any doubt the secretary believes in what they're doing. I also want to posit the same thing's true on the other side. You know, we've heard a lot of rhetoric out of the White House that Republican opposition is simply partisan obstructionist. You know, they were singing a little different tune 6 weeks ago, or when Trade Promotion Authority got passed overwhelmingly by Republican votes to give the president what to that point had been his biggest foreign policy victory of the year. And frankly, if he negotiates successfully deals in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the equivalent agreement with our European friends, it'll probably be overwhelmingly Republican votes that pass that if he chooses to submit an agreement. So to suggest that Republicans aren't willing to support the president simply because there's a partisan difference isn't wrong. I think actually they've demonstrated that they will, or isn't correct. They've demonstrated repeatedly that they're willing to support him if they think he's right, you know, which I assume is true for our Democratic members who opposed him on the trade issue because they thought he was wrong. I don't doubt their motives, but they didn't support, quote, the president for partisan reasons. I would hope they'd grant we're not opposing him today for partisan reasons. There are a lot of things about this agreement that cause me a great deal of concern. Mr. Chairman, I want to address my first question to you. There have been all sorts of news reports about secret side deals between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Have those agreements been fully disclosed to the committee or to the country? Does the administration even have detailed knowledge about those agreements?
Received them. Mr. Cole.
In your opinion, could those agreements materially impact whether or not this is a good agreement or not?
If we go to the issue of self-inspections, I had always presumed that international inspectors would be doing the international inspections. And given the erosion of the original concept of anywhere, anytime inspections to first 24 hours and then, as Michael Hayden, former head of the CIA, explained, into a position where it becomes a political decision, not a technical one, in which Iran has a say, Russia has a say, China has a say in terms of access. I think a debate about that mechanism for verification is one that could have an impact upon members' decisions about whether or not this will be effective in preventing Iran from obtaining a weapon.
Is there any reason to believe that the International Atomic Energy Agency or the Iranian government would make these agreements public so we would all know what the nature of the inspection regime is, you know, who can come, who can't come, under what conditions?
And this is why I wrote to the White House asking that they be made public, and I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be, so that they can be part of this debate.
Do you know if the administration has asked the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Iranian government to make them public?
I do not know the answer to that.
I would certainly hope that they would, and if they haven't to this point, that they do. Let me move to another part of the agreement that we know a little bit more about, and that's the easing of sanctions in terms of the financial windfall that will come to the Iranian regime. As I understood it, when we initially announced, and the president initially announced our objectives in the negotiations, things were supposed to be linked so that as confidence was accumulated that the Iranians were keeping their word, sanctions would be gradually eased. There would be a sort of process of quid pro quo as that unfolded. Is that indeed the nature of the agreement today?
I think one of the things we ran into is the attitude of the military in Iran, which early on boasted that they're not going to give access to their military sites for inspection that they're not going to have that in their dreams, to quote the IRGC leadership. So what evolved was a situation where, because we weren't going to achieve the original goals that we sought in terms of, because it evolved into managed access and then this question of side agreements, Iran just held its position and said, no, we want all the sanctions lifted. And the very real question is, how then do you verify that Iran is keeping its side of the agreement? As Michael Hayden said, the worry we always had was not just the facility we might want to look at, but all the facilities where they might be doing additional work that we couldn't gain access to. So we end up with self-inspections on the Iranian side of the equation, and we end up giving ground in terms of lifting the sanctions without having that verification. So I think it goes right to the conundrum that you point out, Mr. Cole.
Well, let me ask you this, and you alluded to this, but can you give us some idea of what the people in the region, the affected friends and allies of the United States, what's their reaction been?
I received a call from the ambassador from the UAE, who indicated that their government was no longer felt bound by the agreement, which we call the gold standard on nonproliferation, which the UAE had signed. And he indicated to us that, in his words, your worst enemy has achieved this right to enrich. It's a right to enrich now that your friends are going to want to, and we won't be the only country. So I have heard a critique of this on an ongoing basis. Myself and my ranking member have had lunch with the representative of Saudi Arabia. We've heard from the leadership of all 5 political parties, main parties in Israel, from Labor, from center-left, from center-right. We've heard from the governments in Lebanon about their concern. Well, let me just frankly say that as this process went along, we heard concerns from those in the region who feel that Iran might become the hegemon in that region, especially with the lifting of sanctions. We heard their worries about the negotiation.
So that would suggest that this could easily ignite a arms race of sorts in the Middle East between our friends who feel somewhat abandoned or at least vulnerable.
And we've had much testimony, Mr. Cole, before the committee about those who are concerned that we had a non-proliferation regime to which now Iran has carved out an exception. And what then will be the reaction? We already know the reaction from the United Arab Emirates, from that conversation the ambassador had with me, but who else will follow down that road? And that is why it's very important when you have a negotiation to remember that the end goal here is to have something which really could control the right to enrich and also the verification.
You know, one of the things that concerns me about this, and I'll try to be quick because I know my colleagues have many questions too. We hear a lot of comparisons between the Reagan negotiation with the old Soviet Union and this one. And it strikes me that the key difference was at Reykjavik, Ronald Reagan got up and walked out. He said the deal isn't good enough. And lo and behold, we had a deal later that was good enough. Unfortunately, I think that critical moment was probably in April of this last year when the deadline for the negotiation was up. And I think had the president said, everybody's negotiated in good faith, we just can't agree, we're leaving, but the sanctions, of course, stay. If you want to change your mind and give us a call, we'll be happy to come back at the table and sit right back with you and see if we can find a way forward. I think that was really a critical error. I think most negotiations I've seen, if you're extending the deadline, you're the guy making the concessions.
And Mr. Cole, I think that was a fundamental error in judgment because instead, by lifting, at a time when Iran was on the ropes, by lifting sanctions by $700 million a month, that gave Iran the breathing room then and the confidence to believe that if they waited this out, maybe they did not need to give concessions. And it was not just on that front, but also the transfer of, the gold sales from Turkey. There were areas where Iran was beginning to test to see what would we do to prevent Iran from busting sanctions. And in a situation like that, if you don't do what Reagan did, show your resolve, as he showed his resolve in walking away from Reykjavik until he got a better deal. If instead you give in and you start to lift the sanctions and you say, okay, you've got the right to enrich in the meantime, a fair deal would have been to say, okay, you shut down your enrichment and we'll give you something in return. But ultimately, out of that unfortunate situation, we lost the pressure for the right to enrich. But it wasn't just that we lost in the negotiation, because as we went forward, we got rolled on every one of those 4 issues that I raised. And then, amazingly, at the 11th hour, Russia came to Iran's side in this debate and said, by the way, we also want the arms embargo itself lifted on ICBM technology as well as regular conventional arms. And they got that in the negotiation.
Are you aware, and this would be speculative, and you might not be able to answer definitively, but I appreciate your opinion on it because it's well-informed. Were there any gains from April till we signed the deal in July? Did the deal somehow get better for us? I can certainly see a number of ways it got better along the way for the Iranians, because it's very different from the objectives that the president announced at the beginning of the negotiation. But are there areas that we seem to get the upper hand in? Any?
Mr. Cole, I did not see areas where I felt we were gaining ground. And this goes to the issue that I and Mr. Engel and my committee brought up in the prior Congress when we suggested that if we had additional leverage on Iran, if we had passed that legislation which would have cut Iran's access, to its financial sector, and actually give the Ayatollah that tough choice between real compromise on his nuclear program or economic collapse, that was the leverage we needed at a time when Iran was fighting a real financial problem with hyperinflation, very high unemployment, the price of oil going down. That was the time to leverage. But the administration did not want to put that additional leverage on, and despite a bipartisan vote of 400 to 20 in the House, they blocked that legislation in the Senate. So I think we lost our opportunity to leverage for what we needed in the agreement.
Well, I'm going to yield back
Mr.
time,
Cole,
but
sir, before you yield back, would you yield
certainly,
to me for a
my
second?
friend, I'd be happy to
Because I
yield.
think I've got the answer to one of your questions.
Yes, ma'am.
My intrepid staff back here is giving this to me about the question about the side agreements with IAEA. There is no secret side deal hiding loopholes to the nuclear agreement with Iran. Iran has the same sort of agreements with IAEA that the United States has. Iran is a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, so it has so-called, in quote, safeguards agreement with the IAEA that contains, among other things, verification protocols agreed to by IAEA and Iran. The IAEA has these safeguard agreements with 180 countries, including us. We have one of our own. Each one of them are separate. These extremely sensitive agreements, including the USA's agreement with IAEA, are all confidential because if they were public, none of the 180 countries would agree to IAEA oversight.
Well,
If lawmakers from Iran ask the IAEA to see the safeguards agreement with the United States, the IAEA Director General, Yikia, I hope that's right, Amano, would say no, and he did the same when he told our lawmakers that he could not show them Iran's agreement.
reclaiming my time,
Well, thank you for yielding.
Absolutely. I just would point out, there's a big difference between the United States, which hasn't violated the non-proliferation agreement, and Iran that has repeatedly violated it. That's why there was a negotiation, because they had been in violation repeatedly on this. So the idea that they should have the same treatment as people that have kept their word and kept the agreement, I think, is suspect to me. And regardless, at the end of the day, I think think it has to be made available because this is all about a country that has repeatedly broken its word and not kept its commitment. So that would suggest you need to have a little extra assurance on our
But
side.
again, this is an international agreement with the IAEA, and the 180 countries
Well,
have all signed on.
If
to
my
it. So
friends,
They have us unilaterally.
Gentleman from
if
Oklahoma
my,
controls
well,
the
I
time.
didn't say unilaterally. I said, I think the Iranian government, frankly, ought to disclose it. I think the IA, in this case, it's a little bit different because this is a country that has broken its agreement. So we're saying it should have all the privileges under this that everybody has that keeps their word. And I'm sorry, I just don't have that kind of confidence in the people in Tehran and the
Just trying
regime
to
in
help.
Tehran. So that's my concern. Let me yield back, if I may, but I just want to thank my friend, the chairman, and I want to thank your ranking member as well for the manner in which you both have conducted yourself through this and the hearings. It's been informative. It's been helpful to those of us that are not on your committee. And again, look forward to hearing more in the days ahead. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you very much. And let me say at the outset, I support this deal, and I think it's a good deal, and for one important reason, because it blocks all of Iran's pathways to a nuclear weapon, and that's what this deal was supposed to be about. And this negotiation, by the way, stopped the progress on Iran's nuclear program. If it wasn't for this negotiation, Iran would probably have the bomb by now. And then we would be talking about some really awful alternatives here today. And I just also think it's worth repeating that all 15 members of the UN Security Council and the 6 members of the Gulf Cooperation Council, including Saudi Arabia, all support the agreement as the most effective method in preventing a nuclear-armed Iran. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put in the record a letter signed by more than 100 American ambassadors, including 5 former ambassadors to Israel, in support of the deal. I'd like to also ask unanimous consent to put in a record a letter that was sent to all of us by 77 nuclear non-proliferation experts who have been advisors to both Republican and Democratic administrations.
Without objection, so ordered.
Also, a letter that we all should have received from 32 of the nation's top scientists, including Nobel laureates, veteran makers of nuclear arms, and former White House science advisors who wrote a letter in support of this deal. And also a letter that was sent to us by 4,100 U.S. Catholic sisters throughout the United States in support of this deal. Look, I don't trust Iran. I think the verification measures in this agreement are solid, and I think that's reflected by the expert opinion that is coming out in support of this deal. I should also just say for the record, while I don't trust Iran, I don't think the Iranians have a lot of trust for us either. And when you look at our history in Iran, from a CIA overthrow of their government in the 1950s to our collaboration with our then friend Saddam Hussein in the late 1980s when we shared intelligence with him, which he then used to use sarin gas against Iranian soldiers. I mean, I think there's a lot of history with us that provides a lot of skepticism in Iran with regard to anything we do. So neither of us trust one another, and that is precisely why we need an agreement like this that is verified. And I think that the administration deserves credit. And look, I think everybody on this committee has made up their mind on how they're going to vote on this. I think the point of this committee is to make sure that there is ample time for robust debate so that everybody can make their views known and engage in that debate. And I certainly would support that. And I hope we have as much debate as humanly possible because I think it is important for people on both sides to be able to state their opinion. But again, I would just close by saying, you know, I'm going to proudly support this agreement and vote against the resolution of disapproval because I think it's in the interest of the United States. I think it is in the interest of Israel. I think it is the interest of the world to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and I think this is our best chance of doing it. And with that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being with us for so long this evening. It's easy to listen to your testimony and think that your mind is made up about this issue and has been made up about this issue. I know you will not toot your own horn, but it's not as if you just focused on this in 2015. You did lead 80% of this House in trying to get a better, encouraging the president to get a better agreement this year. But you did that very same thing last year, and you did that very same thing in 2013. It has been year after year after year after year that you have been trying to be a productive force in this conversation. I want to read, just in case other folks won't, your letter from this year that, again, on behalf of more than 80% of the House, said, "We hope the administration is able to achieve a lasting and meaningful agreement." To suggest that this is a happy day for folks who disagree with so many of the president's policies is far from true. From day one on issues of international concern, you have tried to be a partner with this White House and lead the White House, and again done so on behalf of the vast majority of this Congress. I'm much less concerned about the so-called 24-day clock on known sites. I'm concerned about the 24-day clock on unknown sites. When you talk about a meaningful agreement, when we talk about the IAEA, if I go back to your letter from 2015, you cite that the IAEA was looking for 12 different sets of information from Iran, and at the time that you penned that letter, Iran had only complied with one of those 12 requests. It's not as if the history of noncompliance is something from the 1970s or the 1980s. It's from spring of 2015 and is ongoing. As I read the agreement, and again, what this Congress asked for was a meaningful and long-lasting agreement. We can discard long-lasting because 10 years is 10 years, and we know long-lasting's not here. But in terms of meaningful, when an unknown site is identified, the U.S. identifies this through our intelligence community, we go to the IAEA, this third-party group, and say, we believe there's something worth looking at here. What happens next?
And that's part of our concern here, because this now becomes a political decision rather than a technical decision. You would hope that the IAEA would simply have the right then to go inspect the site. But having had the precedent already set that, core samples are going to be taken by the Iranians themselves and turned over to the IAEA, what that means is in the future, you're going to have not that anywhere, anytime inspection, not that 24-hour inspection, but you'll have at the outset a 24-day process, a process in which the Iranians are going to have a say, in which Russia and China will have a say out of the 7-party deliberations which will occur. And if one of the European partners decide it's not worth it to press the issue of violations because it might force a reimposition of sanctions, they'll have their 4th vote out of 7. So this is constructed in such a way, in my judgment, as to be of maximum advantage to the military in Iran. And the other point I would make is that, yes, it's easier to get access to civilian sites, but it was always the military sites where we were most concerned, because it was always the military sites where, like Parchin, they had done their bomb work in the past, and it was the military sites which they were most vociferous about never allowing international inspectors in. So, yes, they'll try to self-police those sites, and they'll do so apparently without coming clean on the 12 questions that were asked. They answered, as you said, the first part of one of those questions, but the rest of those answers they refused to give, to date anyway. And so how do we know how far they've gotten on their bomb work? The original insistence, one of the reasons we pushed this whole case, was to try to get those answers and for them to come out the other side of this agreement without coming clean on what they have done in their development of their foundation for their nuclear program is beyond me signing off on something like that. So there's another side agreement where the IAEA apparently will reach some kind of a concurrence with Iran, but one which will not be printed. And again, to go back to the point, The reason Iran is being treated differently, I would say, is because there aren't too many states in the world where the Ayatollah or the head of state attends rallies in which they say, yes, death to America, death to Israel, and so forth.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to be on the record. Chairman Royce, from the very beginning, tried to bring us together around this issue. At every opportunity, he tried to play a constructive role in this, and to have him now as the lone witness sitting at the table, having to speak out against this agreement because it fails to meet those important goals that he set out early on in cooperation with all of us is disappointing. I would argue if we had more Chairman Royces in Congress, we had more folks trying to play that productive, bipartisan, collaborative role up front, we would have fewer contentious Rules Committee meetings, and it is so disappointing to have seen so much work and so much opportunity lost in this particular moment. I thank the chairman. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and let the record reflect, we do appreciate the gentleman being here, taking his afternoon, and we'll continue this push to see if we can get you. We're on one vote tonight, and we're about halfway through that, but we'll keep you informed accordingly.
Thank you,
Gentleman
Mr.
from
Sessions.
Florida's right.
Thank you, Chairman.
Very much,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman, and welcome back to all of the members. I apologize for not being here earlier. I've stated my opposition to this agreement throughout the summer, and there are a plethora of reasons, and I won't bore you, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, or anyone else. But I'm at the point now where I believe that we would be wise to consider what to do after this agreement is enforced. And so, beginning in July, I wrote to the president calling for a high-level military person to be involved in monitoring the monitors of the inspections regime. And toward that end, I believe it would be helpful if staffers from the relevant committees, particularly energy, foreign affairs, the State Department, the Defense Department, would be sequestered to such an individual or individuals for purposes of attending to just that. One of the things that offends me highly is the fact that no American citizen is going to be directly involved in the inspections regime. And I don't think that's right. And that is not even close to a reason. It's among the reasons that I choose to oppose this. Additionally, today, I filed legislation introducing a resolution authorizing military force against Iran if necessary to prevent it from obtaining nuclear weapons. There are too many areas of nebulousness, and I believe in this instance that it would be helpful if Iran clearly understood muscularity, and that this president or any successor, if they did not follow along with this agreement, would have the authority to take whatever necessary military actions to stop them. I have a variety of reasons. I'll have many opportunities to speak during the course of the week. Mr. Chairman, my only request would be of the Rules Committee, and that is that we give sufficient time for there to be a robust debate so that all sides, all members will have an opportunity to offer input. I yield back the balance of my time.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is unusual when the gentleman from Florida and I agree, but I would echo his statement that I hope we allow ample time for debate for this because it is so important. And Mr. Chairman, I just have to ask, we've just all come home from our districts in August, and the question I got over and over again, why is this being handled the way it is and not as would be directed by Article 2, Section 2, second paragraph, where this would be a treaty subject to the advice and consent of the Senate and requiring a two-thirds majority.
And I would concur that I wish the president would support handling this as a treaty. As you know, though, he is in opposition and will veto a bill that would make it a treaty, which then means the question would be to go to court. And how many years would that take? I don't know. But if you're asking me, in my opinion, should he have come before Congress to present this as a treaty, I would say yes. And clearly, he expressed his opposition to it and let us know that if we tried to move in that direction, it would be vetoed. And so that leaves us where we are today.
But it is extremely unfortunate. It certainly points out the wisdom of the founders who purposefully structured this type of arrangement so that it would be difficult and you would have to convince two-thirds majority in the Senate. And as Mr. Cole pointed out, this has two-thirds majority opposition amongst the people when you look at the polling across the country. And certainly what I heard, and I'll just report to you from the 26th district of the great state of Texas, it was uniformly opposed to what is being proposed in this agreement.
Dr. Burgess, if I could respond to that, there is one indirect positive result of this not being a treaty. It does not have the force of law in the United States.
So it really only is in force for the duration of this administration, however long that is.
That's correct.
Let me just ask you, because, I mean, this is really bothersome to me. There are 3 Americans being held prisoner, a 4th for whom is unaccounted but believed to be in Iran. So why wouldn't we structure an agreement where at least there were some certainty that those individuals were being treated fairly, and really, in a perfect world, they would be repatriated to the United States? Certainly the 3 who are prisoners, the one who's not under the control of the Iranian government, I get that. But the Washington Post reporter, the ex-Marine, I mean, these guys should be home.
And we held hearings on this, raised this with the administration repeatedly. And during those hearings, brought family members, including the sister of that Marine, and yes, that young Marine who went to visit his grandmother in Iran has been tortured. We had hearings on the case of Pastor Abedini, a Christian pastor whose crime was merely to gather people to study the Bible. He's been tortured. His wife testified before us. Jason, the Washington Post reporter, as you know, worked for a better understanding of the Iranian people. If you read his columns, you can't figure out what the objection would be because it was simply a people-to-people reporting. And yet, he languishes, in jail and just went through a show trial. Robert Levinson, I don't think we've heard about his whereabouts since 2007. He is the American longest held as a hostage. But holding hostages is not something new for the Iranian regime.
I wasn't there. I watched it on television, but at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the president gave a rather impassioned talk about how the Washington Post reporter should be returned and released by the Iranian government. I mean, was that just a speech? Did that not carry any weight?
Sometimes how a regime treats its own people is a good indication of how it's going to treat its neighbors and others. And as I said earlier, in the case of Iran, you have 2,500 people who were killed this year, killed because of religious differences, because they were Baha'i or, some other minority religion, which the regime takes exception to, or killed because, they spoke out about religious freedom. So we're dealing with absolutists with respect to the Ayatollah and the other clerics running that country. Despite bipartisan calls from Congress, we didn't demand the release of these 4 Americans prior to this agreement, and in my judgment, we should have.
Now, the commander of the Quds Force, Mr. Soleimani, who was responsible if I recall correctly, on several trips to Iraq, it was well known that there was an Iranian general who was in, or an Iranian commander who was involved in the creation or the construction of vehicle-borne explosive devices and individual explosive devices. The type of wiring, the type of copper that was used, pretty much points to this individual. Now, after a period of time, he gets, in fact, a no build by anyone and is free to do whatever he wants. Is that correct?
Sanctions are lifted on General Soleimani, but even before they've been lifted, while it's still a violation, there's every indication that he flew to Moscow and had meetings with senior Russian leaders, including President Putin, as well as the defense minister of Russia. He is credited with the death of over 500 Americans. He has a long, long list of terrorist activity, in charge of assassinations outside of Iran and of military operations outside of Iran. The IRGC carries out the operations inside, the Quds Force are outside. So that would include the Quds forces that helped overthrow our ally Yemen, as well as he personally led an attack into Israel with the Hezbollah unit. He's credited with doing that. He's been in Syria, in Iraq. You get a sense of just what kind of a danger this individual is, and you can only imagine the types of weapons he wants to get his hands on.
Yeah, and one of those will be an intercontinental delivery device. Well, I want to thank you for spending so much time with us today, you know, with all of the activities surrounding the presidential nomination process in our country. It's caused me to dust off my copy of The Art of the Deal. A lot of people refer to this as a deal. This isn't a deal. This is a gift from the administration to the Ayatollahs and the mullahs in Iran. And it should be defeated. It should be turned back. We should treat it as a treaty. And if he can't convince two-thirds of the Senate to be with him, that's the end of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I know we have 4 or 5 other committee members that would wish to speak with you. What I'd like to do is to allow you a chance, if I could, to go down and vote. We have not given you that chance, and for you to come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And so if you could go do that, we'll just stay right here and have a brief discussion, and we'll let you do that, and we'll wait for you to return, please. The committee wants to welcome Araf Chavda, who is from Dallas, Texas, who is at Princeton University, the class of 2017. I want to thank him for being in attendance today, and also a member of my staff, Renee Abney, Texas A&M class of 2016. I want to thank her for taking time to be here today. Both these interns from Princeton University, class of 2017, and Institute of Higher Learning, Texas A&M class of 2016, we welcome you and want to thank you for being here very much. Today, what we've done is we've allowed ourselves a chance to look at the deal that the President, as a result of the Corker bill, we're looking at a disapproval act. I know that we have 2 other members of Congress that are here and would be ready. I believe one of them, the gentleman, Mr. Gomert from Tyler, Texas, would be seeking, and is seeking, to be a member who would come and give testimony. Mr. Gomert, I want you to know that we have received your amendment in the nature of a substitute that we would engage you on, and I'm sure that she would use this time if she would choose to entertain this opportunity. The gentlewoman from New York, if she would choose to enter that into the record, does the gentlewoman choose to do that? Oh, has that been done already? Then I'm sorry, I was gone for a minute. We're trying to burn about 30 seconds. We're trying to do housekeeping. So the gentlewoman has placed a statement of administrative policy.
Thank you for pointing that.
I want to thank her very much for doing that. And so what we're going to do here is wait for Mr. Royce to come back. I want to thank the committee for not only their indulgence in allowing us to meet today, but we did not have the opportunity as a result of two of our witnesses needing to leave and then Mr. Royce needing a chance to go down and vote. The chance for us to wait here for just a minute for Mr. Royce coming back. We will then go to the gentleman from Ohio and then on down the dais. And we note now that the gentleman, the chairman of the committee, ran down and he's running back. Mr. Royce, Chairman Royce, I want to thank you very much. The gentleman from Columbus, Ohio, the gentleman, Mr. Stivers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate Chairman Royce running. That was almost looked like watching the Ohio State game last night. You ran so fast. I appreciate you being here. And, you know, in Congress, we set forward committees to create experts on lots of different areas. You've spent a lot of time in foreign affairs, as has Elliot Engel, your ranking member. I'm really sorry that we don't get the advantage of having him here today to talk about his perspective on this, nor any other members from your committee. In fact, the other two minority members that were here, do they serve on your committee?
No.
Do they serve on the Intelligence Committee by any chance?
Well, maybe in the distant past, they may have.
Okay. But clearly not, they're not getting the benefit of the current briefings in the current situation. Do you know if Ranking Member Engel has made his position public? I believe he has.
Both on the House side, the chairman and ranking member are both opposed to the Iranian nuclear deal, and it's the same in the Senate. Both the ranking Democratic member and the chairman of the committee are also in opposition.
So there is bipartisan opposition to this deal.
From those, I would say, from those who have studied this the closest, we do have concerns.
And I think you've done a great job of outlining those in the previous questions, and I won't make you sort of explain that for me. But what I would like to talk about is just going forward, let's assume for a second that the president does have 34 senators that he claims to have, and this deal is going to happen in its current form. Can you tell me how important your committee is going to be in the work you're going to do to make sure we put pressure on the international community and the administration to make sure we're monitoring the situation, because that's really going to be super important. As I looked at what happened in the North Korean deal from 1994, the North Koreans talked really nice at the beginning, and they signed a deal. And in fact, the framework of that deal was very similar to this deal, that what was included, what wasn't included. But it became very apparent pretty quickly that after a few years that they were going to not follow the agreement. Tell me what your committee can do going forward to make sure that we get the information about when or if Iran might be cheating, how we can make sure that we have a very vigilant follow-up. I mean, that's one of the things that everybody wants to talk about, how Colin Powell said this is a pretty good deal, but he also said, don't trust, verify, 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 I believe. And he said what's really important is how we make sure we follow up to make sure people are actually, agreeing or doing what they said they'd do.
I think the most immediate challenge is going to be, presuming for a minute that we don't prevail, I think the immediate challenge is going to be Iran distancing itself from any commitment on arms transfers, because the other day we saw some of their senior officials say, regardless of what's in the UN sanctions that say we've got to wait 5 years on the arms embargo on the conventional side and 8 years on the ICBM, we don't recognize that. So what does the United States do if we catch Iran in the act of moving a large tranche of missiles, especially the new precision-guided missiles that they claim that they're going to transfer to Hezbollah? And what do we do if Hezbollah starts firing these things off? Because these are not going to be the types of missiles or rockets that you could necessarily stop with the Iron Dome or Patriot batteries. These are a new evolution of rockets that Iran has been working on. Iran is really fixated on its ballistic missile system, both long range in terms of those that would be capable of hitting the United States, which obviously the Ayatollah frequently speaks about, but also the intermediate range ones that they will use.
In the region.
And so the question becomes, what are we willing to do to say, look, part of this agreement is that you're not going to transfer those arms, which you're in the process of doing. And indeed, they're in the process of firing rockets off right now into Israel from Syria. These are Quds forces, Iranians' forces. And so this is why it looks to me like the international community intends to sort of look the other way, turn a blind eye to the violations, the current violations of the agreement. When I said earlier that Iran had cheated on every agreement since 1979, that's the truth. And so I think these are the kinds of issues. Now, in terms of how do we catch them, now that we've got an agreement that says that they are going to do the self-policing, basically, that our international inspectors are not going to be allowed into their military bases, I don't have a good answer to that. I'm very concerned about that.
Well, I appreciate it, and I want to be clear, I oppose the deal. I think you've laid out the reasons why, but I think we all need to stay laser focused on the future and how we can plot the best course given wherever we end up here, and we need to have a plan, and I think your committee is going to be right in the middle of this, and I really appreciate your leadership on this. And I'd just leave you with one last question, because the false question of false premise has been laid forward that it's either this or war. I would just ask you, what would be better if you had to have a war, a conventional war or a nuclear war?
Well, and I think I'm going to go back to the comment of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, that he doesn't buy into the premise at all. He said there's a whole range of options. And one of those options, which I raised earlier, was the fact that we continue to forget that we, in terms of the international market, this country is the 800-pound gorilla. And if you give countries and you give companies a choice between doing business with the United States or only doing business with Iran, I'll just quote Stuart Levy, the former Secretary of the Treasury. It's a pretty easy choice for any business or any country to make. You know what the answer is going to be. The question is, are we going to impose that? And we've never gotten to the point of really pushing that because we haven't been faced a situation desperate enough. But if we have to, if we have to reimpose sanctions, that is the way to do it, and give countries that choice, and give the Ayatollah that choice of whether he wants to see total economic collapse or real compromise on his nuclear program.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, Mr. Chairman, it's good to have you serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee before this Congress. But I'm not going to stay long here, but it just bothers me as one who, frankly, I voted just a few months ago, even against this, because I felt like we left the moorings a long time ago. It's amazing in the last 6 to 8 months hearing the administration going from we'll never allow them to have nuclear weapons, we're going to do everything in our power, to saying, well, we'll let them get them in a certain time frame, in a certain way, giving money. As one who served in Iraq back in 2008, it really, this issue with the IRG really, Mr. Chairman, concerns me probably more than anything. And because it's getting sort of lost, I guess, in the process of the nuclear agreement and the centrifuges and everything else. But what we're doing here is strengthening the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the IRG. We're already seeing it happen. We're already seeing this take place, and really sort of outside the circle of this entire agreement. I'm not sure why we chose to change, why we let this go. This is the part, frankly, that I don't believe the world has an answer for. I don't believe this agreement has an answer for, and why it was added at the last minute. I know we've talked about it in general here today, but this is the part, from your perspective, why was this piece added? Why, besides the fact that it is the biggest gift, in my opinion, to the Iranian regime, the dealings with
The lifting of the arms
lifting
embargo?
of him, yes. Why, give us, if you could, walk the
Yes.
what the other, I mean, I think this should rise the countries around that, the biggest concern here.
This is what held the deal up at the end. It was the introduction of the Russians into the equation, running interference for Iran, saying, no, you're not going to get a deal. And this is all secondhand. I wasn't there in the room. But the Russians saying, no, you're not going to get a deal unless we lift the sanctions, on arms transfer. Now, why would the Russians be interested in that? I can tell you, in my opinion, it's because they intend, just as we see evidence of it right now, to make a lot of money by transferring arms to the Iranian regime. They know that into the escrow account is going to come $100 billion when this deal is done. And so they have the technical capability, for example, to sell targeting information to the Iranians. Right now, the Iranians can send those 3-stage ICBMs up, but they can't control where they land. They're not good at that. But I'm going to bet, I'm going to hypothesize that they'd be willing to pay an awful lot of money to get that capability. The second thing is conventional arms, and this gives the Russians the capability to transfer conventional arms also, which, of course, the Iranian government and the Revolutionary Guard Corps really need to carry out their operations to assist the Houthi rebels, whether it's overthrowing Yemen, whether it's the low-level insurgency they're trying to inspire among the Houthis in Saudi Arabia, where the oil fields are, whether it's in Syria, where they're firing rockets right now into Israel, or were a few weeks ago with the Quds forces, or whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Lebanon, where they're trying to strengthen Hezbollah and take over Lebanon. So, they have an agenda where they're in need of hard currency, and it's been cut off for a long time. And this would give the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps a real shot in the arm in terms of getting the weapons it needs. So that's why I think that was introduced at the 11th hour.
Well, and I think that's what brings so much concern to the table, that you bring this in, basically held off to the very end when the deal was there, and then bring this in, and the Russians, of course, stepping in. This is the part that anyone who is concerned about Israel, anyone who's concerned about the Middle East in general, and looking at this, would say that this agreement, not only just on its face has issues, but you made a comment just a few minutes ago that I think goes back to my heart and why it just distressed greatly the path that we went on from the end of last year basically to this agreement. And that was moving away from the sanctions, moving away from the international, capability into, at a point when you said they're going to have to choose between us or those partners. We had that ability. We let that ability go. And for whatever gain, which it doesn't seem to be, especially as we get more and more into the details of how it will be inspected, how it will go forward, except for political gain or legacy, whatever we want to call it, it is very disturbing that we had that leverage. We had even a election there that said that right after Ronnie was elected, he said, you got to go get these sanctions off. We're basically struggling here, and we let it go. I think the history that was spoken of earlier by other members, the history here will be, how did we let this go when we were in a position of power and we went to a position of weakness? And that's what the administration will have to answer in their memoirs. I don't want to see this go through. We're going to have to continue to fight this. I appreciate the chairman's vigilance and get yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you and the members of your committee and your staff for the excellent work that you've done on this. I serve on the Armed Services Committee, and we've been looking at this from our perspective. And the thing that bothers me the most about this is that when we're talking about these things, the State Department gets to negotiate this. The men and women in the uniforms of the United States of America have to defend against it. And I don't think people have been thinking about that. Back earlier this year on the Armed Services Committee, we heard from the Defense Intelligence Agency. And this is not classified, so I'm not releasing anything. This is what they told us. The Islamic Republic of Iran continues to threaten U.S. strategic interests in the Middle East. Iran's actions and policies are designed to further its goal of becoming the dominant regional power, as well as to enhance its strategic depth. Iran views the United States as its most capable adversary and has fashioned its military strategy and doctrine accordingly. And they talk about some more specifics about what they're doing, and they make this statement: numerous underground facilities reduce the vulnerability of critical elements of Iran's military, so they can hide from us what they're doing, strengthen and make it more difficult for our conventional weapons to reach them. Then they go on to talk about nuclear weapons. This is the National Defense Intelligence Agency, we continue to assess that Iran's goal is to develop capabilities that would allow it to build missile deliverable nuclear weapons. The regime faces no insurmountable technical barriers to producing a nuclear weapon. Iran's overall defense strategy relies on a substantial inventory of theater ballistic missiles capable of reaching as far as southeastern Europe. Iran continues to develop more sophisticated missiles and to improve the range and accuracy of current missile systems. Iran has publicly stated that it intends to launch a space launch vehicle as early as this year that could be capable of intercontinental ballistic missile ranges. In July of this year, before the Senate Armed Services Committee, General Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said, under no circumstances should we relieve pressure on Iran relative to ballistic missile capabilities. And then earlier this year, the Director of National Intelligence said, we judge that Tehran would choose ballistic missiles as its preferred method of delivering nuclear weapons. Iran's ballistic missiles are inherently capable of delivering weapons of mass destruction. So from the point of view of protecting the people of the United States, the burden of which falls on those men and women out there in ships today and in airplanes and our wonderful ground forces, let me ask you to confirm or not what General Dempsey has posed to us. Are these circumstances that we are relieving pressure on Iran relative to ballistic missile capabilities?
I believe that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, as well as the Secretary of Defense, were correct. And I believe it was a blunder. It was a blunder in the final hours of negotiation, and I would maybe credit this to the zeal for the deal, I don't know. But to concur with the pressure from Russia and Iran to lift the arms embargo, to lift that prohibition on assistance with their ICBM program as well as their conventional arms. I think that was not in the security interests of the United States.
So you would agree that that relieves pressure on Iran's ballistic missile capabilities?
Absolutely, because it will allow Russia to cooperate, for example, with Iran on their ICBM program in the future, which I don't think under any conditions we should have entertained.
You know, one of the things that bothers a lot of people about this deal is that we hear a lot about, well, a lot of people are just doing this because they have some special relationship with Israel. They want to protect Israel. I'm a strong supporter of Israel. I make no apologies for that. But I oppose this deal because it's bad for the United States of America. They don't need intercontinental ballistic missiles to hit Israel. They need ICBMs to hit us. And that's their intent. That's what, these aren't partisan people. The Defense Intelligence Agency, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the director of National Intelligence, these are professionals. And they're all telling us the same thing, that these ICBMs, these ballistic missiles, threaten the defense of the United States. Yes, sir, go ahead.
If I could respond to that. In the words of the Ayatollah, in keeping with the point you're making, Israel is just the little Satan. We're the great Satan in his equation. So I concur with your
Well,
your
would the
point.
gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would, again, remind the gentleman that this agreement is about preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, which I would like to think we all can agree is, it would be a bad idea. But I just wanted to pick up on one thing the gentleman said about that decisions that are made by the State Department have to be, you know, the burden falls on our men and women who serve our country in the military. Because I think this is a good moment to remind everybody here, because when we talk about our responsibility to our troops, that we are at war right now, not in Iran, but in Iraq and in Syria. And to the best of my knowledge, this institution can't get the spine together to actually bring an authorization to the floor and take and do our constitutional job to take responsibility for what these men and women are now having to deal with. I mean, every day we are engaged in military actions, bombing every day. I know the chairman agrees that we ought to have an authorization here, but I mean, you know, at least on this vote, at least on this issue here, you can vote no. You know, if enough people vote no, then the president doesn't get his way, then this can't go forward. But we're at war right now, and we don't even talk about it. So I appreciate the concern for our troops, but I wish that concern translated
Well,
into
reclaiming
an
my
authorization.
time, Mr. McGovern, the truth of the matter is that this will provide money to a regime that takes that money and gives it to terrorist groups that target U.S. Military personnel and have killed them. And this will increase the likelihood of that, not decrease it.
And we are
which is,
supporting-
excuse me, I have my time, which is exactly General Dempsey's point. And the burden does fall on them. And this is not about what's happening in Syria right now. It's what's happening in Iran and what Iran intends to do throughout the Middle East against the interest and the people of the United States of America. In 1938, England decided to go to Munich and appease Hitler. You know what happened? We had World War II. Winston Churchill wrote a book
I'd be
called
careful
Wild...
about
I
historical
did not give up my
analogies.
time, Mr. McGovern. I still have my time. Winston Churchill wrote a book called While England Slept. John F. Kennedy, as a senior at Harvard, wrote his senior thesis called Why England Slept. I can't imagine John F. Kennedy agreeing to this agreement, knowing what we know from these nonpartisan professionals who deal with the defense of our country. I was in the store the other day buying some groceries, and a woman came up to me with tears in her eyes because she was so worried about this, not because she was concerned about Israel. She was concerned about herself. And I think it behooves us in this Congress to understand that our main job here is to defend the American people. This deal, based upon what we know from the nonpartisan professionals that defend this country, endangers the American people. And I will vote against it, and I hope we will have a vigorous debate on the floor about it so we can make sure the people of America know what the truth is, and so we can have a vote so everybody in America can know where we all stand as their representatives.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, the American people can make their decision about whether we made the right decision or not. But I know,
I don't want-
I know from
I
this,
don't want
I
Iran
have
to have
my
a nuclear
time. I have
weapon.
not given up my time.
I do not want Iran to have a nuclear
I have
weapon.
not given up my time. This deal was negotiated because somebody had a desire to get an agreement almost under any circumstance. Because if you look at what General Dempsey said, he said, under no circumstances should we relieve pressure on Iran relative to ballistic missile capabilities. You know what? Under these circumstances, we did it.
Well, the gentleman-
And why America would sleep in the middle of that, I don't understand. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I guess you think you're in the Senate where you filibuster, yeah. Yeah, I do, Mr. Chairman. One is to characterize this deal in those terms, I think is irresponsible, to be honest with you. And it goes to the motives of the people who have been working diligently to try to negotiate a deal to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I think it is in the interest of the United States of America to make sure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. I think this is our best opportunity to do so. If the gentleman disagrees with that, fine. But making comparisons to Munich and to going and to twist history, I think is irresponsible. I give the administration a great deal of credit for coming up with an agreement, by the way, that has the support of major nuclear non-proliferation experts, national security experts, from Colin Powell to Brent Scowcroft. I mean, you know, the way this has been characterized by the gentleman is like nobody of any, of any gravitas believes that there's any merit to this. He's wrong. We can have disagreements on this. I get it, but to go down that road to kind of characterize it the way the gentleman did, I don't think is appropriate. And you know, he could vote against it, and those of us who support it can vote for it. We will have a vote on this. My point originally was that that this Congress is shirking its responsibility in a war that we are involved with in Iraq and Syria right now, that this Congress has just walked away from and totally turned its back on the American forces that are over there right now. And my constituents are wondering, why is it that we are putting more and more money and more American forces into Iraq, a government that now is totally allied with Iran? Maybe the gentleman, if he comes to Massachusetts, can answer that question.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond very briefly?
Just one moment, please. Does the gentleman seek further time, or did the gentleman yield
Happy
back?
to yield to the gentleman.
Yields-
We'll yield to the gentleman. I believe in back and forth.
Well, you may believe in that. Do you wish to entertain the gentleman, or you yield?
I
it
do.
back to
I'm
the
happy to yield to the gentleman.
I have great respect for Mr. McGovern. He's a very, very capable member of this House. But I think this is the very heart of this deal. And I don't think it's irresponsible to bring up 3 defense professionals' clear statements. I think it would be irresponsible not to bring them up. Yes, we need to have a vigorous debate. I'm not questioning people's motives. I'm questioning the rationale. And if we can't have a debate where we question the rationale of the single most important vote this Congress has taken since we declared war on Japan and Germany, then I think we would be shirking our responsibilities. So I stand by my comments. I would be happy to come to the gentleman's district, and I would be happy for you to come to my district, because I had 16 town halls in my district the last few weeks, and I can guarantee you there wasn't a single person at any one of my town hall districts who was for this deal. You may talk about these great experts, but the people of America don't like this deal, nor should they. Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from the state of Washington, the gentleman, Mr. Newhouse, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman
Yes, sir.
Sessions. Appreciate that. I appreciate you having such patience for this important topic. And Chairman Royce, thank you for being here with us so much time given to this issue on Iran. You know, I've only been in the House for almost 9 months now, and I think I'll be able to say if I'm lucky enough to be here in another 9 years, this is probably going to be the most important vote I take. All of us collectively will probably be able to say something similar. I read the agreement. I went downstairs and availed myself and took the time to read what was in it. I've gone to Israel to visit with people in that country to hear their concerns, their questions, things that I felt that I needed to understand. I've listened intently to Secretary Kerry, to Secretary Moniz, and as well as Secretary Liu. I went into this process with as open a mind as possible because this is an important decision. It's not a Republican versus a Democrat decision. If it's a good deal, it's a good deal. If it's not, it's not. And it shouldn't be just because you have a particular letter behind your name, and I'm afraid it's turning into that. And that's very, very unfortunate. But I have, after all this process, and very much enjoyed the conversation today. This has been very helpful. Some of the new things have come out to me, and so that's been helpful to help solidify my decision. I still have some grave concerns, and I wanted to ask you, Chairman Royce, if you could help me get through some of these things. You know, we've had, I think, a fairly long history, bipartisan history of opposing a nuclear Iran. The world has also been working hard to make sure that doesn't happen. And it seems to me that even if Iran followed this agreement to a T, that within a very short time, within a decade, they would be on a path to having a nuclear weapon, clearly with the blessing of the international community and the United States. And it just seems to me that this goes against what we've been working for so many years to achieve, goes against the stability of the region, certainly of the world. Can you comment on that? Is that a correct assessment, Chairman?
I think that assessment is correct, Mr. Newhouse. I think that in 10-plus years, between 10 and 15 years, they're going to be on the threshold of having that capability, and that is if they do not cheat.
Yeah.
If they cheat, it will be sooner. But it is the other consequences of this agreement which are so concerning, because in releasing $100 billion or so into the hands of the government in Iran, which actually controls the contracts, controls the Iranian economy, controls the companies in Iran which will be doing business with companies around the world, you give them the wherewithal to do something that up until now they have not been able to do. It is the largest terrorist supporting network that we're dealing with on the planet. And as we discussed previously, throughout the region, they have big ambitions. When you talk about Egypt, and you think about the fact that it was the Iranian regime that was putting money into the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood or funding Hamas, what do we think is going to happen when they have that kind of capability, not just to transfer the resources, but now they're talking about transferring weapons? And I think it is going to be a huge challenge when you have the Quds Force and you have individuals like General Soleimani out there in the region now with limitless resources virtually, because what we're talking about is just the down payment with $100 billion. After that come the contracts. Come the contracts that put the money further into the hands of the Ayatollah and his allies in that regime. So every aspect of this, the commitment to build ballistic missiles. When you have someone on the ropes, why give them the wherewithal to fund their ballistic missile program when you have the Ayatollah on record saying it's every military man's responsibility to help mass produce ICBMs? What do we think he means by that? And unfortunately, I'll just conclude with this. For me, I believe he means this. When he says death to America, death to Israel, I take him seriously. Because in the past, when people have talked like that, we've ignored their rhetoric at our peril, especially in cases with personalities that have already shown themselves willing to break international law and commit mayhem throughout the region, underwrite political assassinations, kill their own people, hold U.S. citizens as hostages. I take them at their word, and therefore I think it would behoove us to defeat this deal and push for one that gives the Iranian regime, gives the international community a choice. You either do business with the United States or you do business with Iran, but you don't do both. So if you don't want to deal in the international market or in the international financial system with the United States, so be it. You're out. And as I said, Stuart Levy over at Treasury indicated to me, when he was there, that this ultimately is the way to force the real compromises that you need in their nuclear program. So that's the conclusion I've reached. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't buy into the premise that it's this deal or war, that's the only two options. I think there's a lot of things that are available to us, and we should exercise every one of those options. Not only the future, in the short term, I don't know, maybe this does help things, but 10 years to me isn't very long. Seems like the years go by faster every birthday I have. But a decade from now, you know, we will have, you know, I'm from a rural area, the horse will be out of the barn and we're not going to be able to put it back in. And so I think every effort that we can utilize or exercise to get a better deal, and I think we can, we need to. So I appreciate the time that we're taking today. I hope and I believe we'll be taking a lot of time in the coming days to debate and discuss this. We need to vet this very carefully, and I hope every member of this body votes their conscience and listens intently and makes as good a decision as they possibly can. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Your time to be here today, but for your attention to detail and the things which you've done. I also want to point up two staff members that you have, Ed Burrier and Doug Anderson, came by to brief me this morning. We spent about an hour, and I found them most instructive to talk with me about the issues surrounding this entire matter to where we got closer to focusing on that. We will do our very best to get you on the floor here very quickly with enough time for not only you, but the other relevant committees that would choose to speak about the various piece parts of this. And I want to thank you for your leadership on behalf of your party and also this conference.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions. I want to thank the other members of the Rules Committee.
I'd like to thank you
Ranking
too,
member.
Mr. Royce. Thank you very much, and thank you for your staying power.
Thank you, Ms.
My
Slaughter.
side kind of honked out here, didn't it? But thank you.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
being here.
Mr. Chairman, if you'll please make sure anything you brought in writing that you want to have included, we'll do that, and I want to thank you very much. We now move to the second panel. The gentleman from Tyler, Texas, would be asked to come and be a part of this. Does the gentlewoman from Houston, Texas seek to be a part of the second panel? I would ask the gentlewoman please come join this table. Obviously, I'm looking at what I believe is why you're here, Mr. Gomert. I don't know how the gentlewoman wishes to. She would be joining you?
No.
Oh, would not join you. So I do not have a piece of necessarily any amendment that I'm aware of that you're here for. So I'm first going to, does the gentlewoman wish to speak about the deal as a whole? And on the procedure of such. That would be great. You're both going to be here for some period of time to get through this, so the gentlewoman from Texas would be recognized. If the gentlewoman would like to do that, the distinguished gentleman from Tyler, Texas, Mr. Gomer, is recognized.
All right, thank you, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman. Thank everybody here. I don't have to take too long. The chairman, Chairman Royce, has been quite clear and very articulate, and been some great questions. The deal fairly flawed, as he said. As he pointed out, Iran's violated every deal they've made since 1979. I would suggest, though, when it comes to the UN agreement and the 15 parties that voted, taking the current bill to the floor would not be a capitulation on our obligation to the UN. It would be a capitulation on our oath to support and defend the Constitution. It's very clear. Article 2, as the gentleman has already pointed out, Section 2, talking about the President, he shall have the power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. And I know Mr. Royce, Chairman Royce had said that that would be the preferred method, except that the President's already threatened that he would veto any effort along those lines. Well, the fact is that Article 2, Section 2, when it comes to treaties, does not make any provision for the President's veto. The Senate can take a matter up that is a treaty, which this clearly is, and then if they vote 2/3 to ratify, it's ratified. If they don't, there is no veto available to the president. Having consulted with numerous constitutional law professors, including Berkeley constitutional law expert, professor there, who says that although the Senate may say the president needs to submit the Iranian agreement as a treaty for ratification, that actually the Senate could call it up on its own, vote, and if it doesn't get 2/3, any court should say it failed to get the 2/3 necessary for ratification, and therefore it is not binding upon, nor is it enforceable against the United States. So it's a question. Are we going to ignore the Constitution? And I didn't vote for the Corker bill, like some of my friends here did not, but it is important to note that everyone that did vote for the Corker-Cardin bill had plenty of assurances that that was from the President and the Secretary of State, that that was the proper thing to do. And in fact, the President, his spokespeople were saying this was an executive agreement. It does not require any kind of ratification under Article 2. They made very clear that this, in fact, as I noted in the findings in the amendment in the nature of a substitute, on March 11th, Secretary of State Kerry had stated very clearly that he was not negotiating a legally binding plan. And then they go on. And I think we all know that any agreement between the United States and another country that affects, changes, modifies an existing treaty is a treaty, and it does require ratification by 2/3 of the Senate. Well, this Iranian deal, which really is a treaty, does that. Article 1 of the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which the U.S. is signatory, and this is number 23 of the findings, and under which the United States is obligated, is not in any way to assist, encourage, or induce Iran to acquire nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices or control over such weapons or explosive devices. Clearly, now we know this Iranian deal is a treaty because it does affect that under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We also know that directly or indirectly, we're not supposed to allow acquisition of nuclear weapons or capabilities of controlling nuclear weapons for Iran, and that is being changed. Number 25 points out that Article 3 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty regarding international inspectors in Iran, and I'm quoting, who shall have access at all times to all places and data and to any person who by reason of his occupation deals with materials, equipment, or facilities which were required by this statute to be safeguarded. Obviously, this deal, people on this committee have talked repeatedly about what will be allowed and not allowed. It is changing the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That makes it a treaty. And then, of course, it amends the Non-Proliferation Treaty outside the prescribed method of amendment in Article 8 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So we were assured, and all of those that voted for the Corker-Cardin bill in the House and in the Senate relied on the representations of the President, the Secretary of State, all their spokespeople, that this was not going to do any of those things, not going to be binding, and if those had been accurate, then the Corker-Cardin bill was a good way to get Congress with a say in this negotiation. Now that we see it truly as a treaty, to do anything but bring a bill, I don't care whose name's on it, I don't care, we put the whole Rules Committee, but let's bring a bill to the floor, not the one that's going to say we approve or disapprove, because that is, in effect, bringing our approval, disapproval vote to effect when it's really a sham. This is a treaty. It's clearly a treaty. And I wish the House had a say in treaties. It doesn't. So the House ought to demand that the Senate take up their role. Corker-Cardin doesn't apply here. And I know my friend, our friend Congressman Roscom is down on the floor, or he has a privileged motion he's making that actually Corker-Cardin has not been triggered yet because all of the agreement has not been provided to the House as required under Corker-Cardin. So he's got a point, but I would submit to this committee, the truth is, this is a treaty, and we need to vote and call it what it is. And I tell you what, America will be proud. The two-thirds that have been referenced here will be proud. And those who would quote Ronald Reagan, trust but verify, as my friend from Oklahoma pointed out, he walked away from the bad deal at Reykjavik. And as a result of his steadfastness, brought down an evil empire in the Soviet Union. We can help do that too with Iran, but not if we treat a treaty as anything other than a treaty. So I would encourage you to accept any kind of amendment you wish to make in the nature of a substitute, anybody's name on it you cared to put on there, but we need to call this what it is, and America will be grateful. I feel so strongly about this. If we'll just do what the Constitution says, I'm willing to make my leadership happy and not run again. I feel that strongly about it, but it is imperative that we follow the Constitution here. And if we don't follow the Constitution, I'm going to be around probably for a long time as the biggest pain in the rear that people can imagine. I thank the gentleman. Yield back.
Yes, sir. Ms. Jackson-Lee?
Mr. Chairman, Rules Committee, I thank you for delaying your time for this second panel, and I also want to join some of the comments that I've heard. This has been a very deliberative discussion. For those of us who are able to hear a good part of it, it was thoughtful and very helpful. I indicated that I wanted to just briefly discuss one or two procedural points, one of which I've heard a number of people to indicate give us a vigorous amount of time for debate, and I'd like to offer an 8-hour debate per day, Wednesday and Thursday, and then maybe half that amount, 4 hours on Friday. I do believe that more than a 10-hour debate on a 435-person Congress is vital and important, and I've heard a number of time frames, but we may have individuals who want to raise constitutional issues, and I think that this is a very important vote. The second point I want to make, and I think the tone here was very appropriate, is that we have the responsibility not to frighten the American people. We do have differences of opinion. It is going to probably be emotional. All of us will probably be making statements of our affection for Israel and the work we've done for Israel, as well as, I assume, some of us will also speak about peace in the Middle East, and we'll also recognize the heinousness of some of the actions of Iran. I don't think that we will deny that discussion on the floor. But what I wanted to say is that as I listened to Chairman Royce, who worked and had the House version of Public Law number 114-17, which is the public law of the Corker-Cardin bill. And I just want to read the provisions, because as I heard the discussion, I want to make the point that as we proceed with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, there is existing public law that will guide the enforcement or the response that Congress can have. I also want to, as I read these provisions into the record, Mr. Chairman, say that I have not heard the administration counter with the alternative is war. I think what the point is that if necessary, that the United States is both as the singular world power, and some argue that franchise terrorism makes terrorism fighting in a different format, is well prepared to address the breaches that Iran may encounter, if necessary, in an approach that may require military utilization. But I have not heard any of the members here document the so-called alternative is war. But let me just read so that we know that Congress is not relieved of her constitutional responsibilities or statutory responsibilities. The public law says, after the congressional review period, the president would be required to provide an assessment to Congress every 90 days on Iran's compliance with the agreement. In the event the president cannot certify compliance, or if the president determines there has been a material breach of the agreement, Congress could vote on an expedited basis to restore sanctions that have been waived or suspended under the agreement. The bill also requires the president to make a series of detailed reports to Congress on a range of issues, including Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missiles work, which I heard vigorously discussed here, and its support of terrorism globally. Of course, we know that the agreement does not give Iran a pass on the issues of sanctions and its terroristic activities. I close by saying that all of us want the hostages to be returned. I don't think the story is finished or the door is closed. I hope as we continue this that we'll be reminded of Congress's continuing engagement responsibility as dictated by Public Law 114-17, and that will be part of the debate going forward so that it can be both a vigorous and factual debate, being an effective story, if you will, because the American people will be watching on how we ultimately make the decision on a very important responsibility that has now been given to this Congress. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there any member of the Democrats' side here that has questions? Seeing none, is there a Republican member that would seek time? The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the issue, and it goes back to something the gentlelady from Texas, who I enjoy serving with on the Judiciary Committee, we talk about a lot of different things, and we many times have a difference of opinion. I think a difference of opinion is still here. In looking at this simple fact that this issue of terrorism, this issue of the lifting of those, the Iranian Guard, those are issues that take away from, I think, what was even expressed by earlier today by Mr. Montgomery, you know, the issue of the nuclear agreement. This was the part that concerns many of us here at the end in the actual text and actually what was done. In the longer part of this, not even getting to the fact of the nuclear agreements, the closing of the reactors or moving those are the expressions. I think that's the part that came in at the end. It was a surprise to most watchers of the agreement. And then coming in, and I think lends to Mr. Gomer's part, is the fact of when does this translate over from the agreement to the treaty aspect, and there's a lot of concern on that. I'm not sure how, though, we do not look at that aspect as a part, and maybe I misunderstood what you said in your statements, that was really addressed in other ways. Would you like to explain more why this issue of the terrorism, the issues that were addressed earlier, which you were here for when I had spoke to the chairman, how that would not be, you know, or how would not really be a part of this treaty as far as affecting why we should not be in support or in support of this? And I think, because I may have misheard you, so I just would like to hear what you were discussing there. To you, Congresswoman.
First of all, let me add just a little anecdote. Today I was in the 9/11 Memorial in New York with the Homeland Security Committee. And if there's ever a more sobering and emotional experience, it is to go there and recognize what America has been through the actions of terrorists. The point that I was making, and I think it's been made here before, is that the sanctions, the actions of Iran, as all have indicated, that it is a state sponsor of terrorism. Those sanctions are separated from the question of the issue of a non-nuclear agreement, that those sanctions will continue.
And I think what I was, and I appreciate your answer, I think the concern that I'm having is this part dealing with the Iranian Guard is not separate from this. This is still covered, as you're saying, under something else, but it was brought in to bear in this agreement. And I think that's the concern that was discussed earlier, as my friend from Alabama was speaking about this. I think understanding the threats that are there is a very real undercurrent of this agreement. It's a very real undercurrent of the problems that we're having. Many of us are struggling with just the framework and structure of how this is set up. Take anything out of what I may or may not feel about the motivations or the realistic possibilities of anything else, just getting to the very heart of it was very much a concern. But I do appreciate you attempting to clarify that now with that.
And if I might, I referred you to, I think, more of the Corker-Cardin bill than maybe some, and there are provisions in that bill that have an intimate relationship with the administration and Congress in terms of the kinds of reporting, which would include your concerns about the Iranian Guard.
And I think as one is is also the gentleman from Texas, well, I voted against that bill. I felt like we left the moors of our tradition when we left the sanctions part of this. So, I mean, you know, and we can be sitting here saying, why are we voting that day? Well, it's because of that bill. And if we'd have never left our bearings of saying we need to focus on not letting them have the economic sanctions lifted so that they will actually come to a deal, then we wouldn't be here sitting here today. I believe we could have got a better deal, or we could have still putting a country to economic ruin. They had an election, they changed that. The first thing they want to do is get rid of sanctions. What do? They go to the table and promise everything. I think that's, again, with a country that's never lived up to the most part of any agreements that they've had, that's just a concern to many of us. There's differences of opinion. That's why we have the debate. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
If I just may say a sentence. Yeah, Ms. Collins and I have bigger debates on the Judiciary Committee, and part of this agreement has that. But let me just say that a counter to that would be that we have obviously implemented sanctions on Iran for a very, very, very long time. And they are at the breaking point. And I would make the argument that this is an agreement appointedly directed at stopping the nuclear proliferation in Iran. And so it's always a question of whether sanctions would break them any further. They are at their low point. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. Is there any other member of the committee that seeks time? Thank you very much. I want to thank both of our witnesses for taking time. Mr. Gomert, I know you sat here a bulk of the time, and I know, Ms. Jackson Lee, you put your time in the chair today, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you all very much.
Y'all, please make sure anything you had in writing that you would leave for our great stenographer. We appreciate it. Okay, this closes the hearing portion. See no further member seeking time. This closes the hearing portion of our effort on HJ Res 64. And the chairman will now be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant HJ Res 64, disapproving of the agreement transmitted to Congress by the President on July 19, 2015, relating to the nuclear program of Iran, a closed rule. The rule provides 10 hours of debate equally divided among and controlled by the respective chairs and ranking minority members of the committees on Foreign Affairs, Financial Services, the Judiciary, Oversight and Government Reform, and Ways and Means. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. The rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the joint resolution. The rule provides a final period of debate which shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs. The rule provides one motion to recommit. Finally, Section 2 of the rule provides that upon receipt of a message from the Senate transmitting HJ Res 61 with a Senate amendment to the text thereof consisting only of the text of HJ Res 64 as passed by the House shall be considered to have concurred in the Senate amendment or amendments.
Thank you very much. I now defer myself for further explanation. This rule provides for consideration of the disapproval under a closed rule. That way it can be a clear vote. You're for it or you are against it. Rule provides for 11 hours of debate divided among the committees of jurisdiction. Lastly, the rule provides that if the Senate passes a joint resolution that is identical to the House version, we will consider the Senate version as adopted. I think what we've tried to do is have a long, fruitful hearing today to where all members had an opportunity to be heard. We now, you've heard the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Is there amendment or discussion thereon? Gentlewoman from New York.
We don't have any amendments obviously on our side.
Yes, ma'am.
But I am concerned, I think we all are on number 8. Receive the message from the Senate with Senate amendments to text.
Right.
As you understand, we're deeming that we concurred with whatever the Senate does, correct?
Well,
Why are we
essentially.
doing that?
Yeah, essentially what's happening is both these bodies are going after this same effort at the same time. Normally what happens is one body will take it and they may name it something different. It may have a Senate number. So normally what happens is the House will pass something and the Senate will take that measure up. This is being concurrently done by both sides, and they may take up a different number of the bill. They may call their bill something different. But as long as the text exactly is the same, we're saying we will adopt that.
As long as it's exactly the same.
It's
Look, why-
exactly the same. But the title of the bill may be different. So the text of the bill.
Well, once again, I think because we say it often, we're very fond over here of regular order.
Well,
And we
fond
kind
or
of
not,
like that every now
this
and
is
then
going to take
we hope to
us.
see it.
We have been over through 30 hearings on this matter, and the Senate has their procedures and processes. All we're trying to simply say is if the bills are exactly the same text, the title of the bill does not have to be necessarily the same.
Consisting only of HRS 54.
It's not a trick.
All right, thank you for your explanation.
Yes, ma'am. Gentleman from Florida.
This is just not a big serious question, but in relating in Section 2 of the rule, we speak to what I gather are the relevant committees, those committees being Foreign Affairs, Financial Services, the Judiciary, Oversight and Government Reform, and Ways and Means. And while I don't have any access to grind with any of the committees, and I guess one could argue that maybe all of the committees of Congress ought to be involved, but is there any particular reason that Armed Services is not involved in the matter dealing with this issue?
At the time a bill is dropped, and I know we all know this, and I'm going to get to the answer, there are referrals that are made based upon the subjective reading of the bill. They did not receive any referral, so we did not include them. In other words, parliamentarian, as they read it, makes that determination.
I
So
understand.
there were no sections that were deemed appropriate or within that jurisdiction.
I appreciate the chair's clarification. I would not even pursue it further, other than to observe.
Still a good
that
question.
it would seem to me that Armed Services could make a credible presentation regarding what they may or may not have heard at a given time.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I was going to ask why rules wasn't mentioned, but then we had our 10 hours of debate already.
You know,
Intelligence hasn't been heard from.
you know, I might say that this is a very difficult issue, and I thought the committee did a pretty good job of keeping that in check today. The vote will now be on, as I understand it, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. And I will be handling this for Republicans,
Good. I'll be handling it for myself.
and Mrs. Slaughter will for Democrats. I do not anticipate that there will be further Rules Committee activity this week, and I thank you very much
Thank you.
for this hearing.
You should be able to file in about 10 minutes.